Following a string of tragic incidents that have decimated the city, 6 famous people from Los Angeles are compelled to stay in James Franco's home. Inside, the group must face both the apocalypse and themselves. The opening scene of the movie shows Seth Rogen in Los Angeles airport waiting for Jay Baruchel, his old friend and fellow Canadian actor who is coming to visit him. They enjoyed their day together before Seth invited Jay to come with him to the housewarming party James Franco is hosting later that night. Nighttime came, Jay and Seth arrived at the housewarming party and they were welcomed by the host himself. The duo talked with James and then Mindy Kaling for a while and Jay was already uncomfortable. Witnessing Rihanna slap Michael Cera on the face after he smacked her on the buttocks without her consent just worsened that discomfort. Jay and Seth were then approached by Jonah Hill, who expressed his happiness at finally meeting Jay. The conversation and Jonah's jokes seemed to be too much for Jay, who decided to excuse himself to get some fresh air. He went to the backyard pool and met Craig Robinson and Emma Watson. During the conversation, Jay expressed his dislike for Los Angeles, which made Craig and Emma assume that he's some kind of hipster. Too uncomfortable, Jay asked Seth if he could go out with him for a while. The duo went to a convenience store when a sudden tremor occurred. Jay watched with wide eyes as beams of blue light coming from the sky suddenly appeared and sucked people away. Seth stood up and the sudden brutal death of the cashier triggered him to run away from the scene, heading back to James' house. When they reached the actor's house, they found that the party was still going on and everything inside seemed to be perfectly fine, as if nothing was happening outside. Jay told them what happened and everyone just laughed at him, not believing him. Their laughter turned into screams when an earthquake occurred and they all ran out of the house. But they all stopped upon seeing the state of the city, and Michael, who was standing a little bit far from everyone else, got impaled by a falling lamppost. Underneath that lamppost, a sinkhole formed, killing most of the celebrities. Jay almost fell into the sinkhole, but he crawled back up and ran back inside the house, following Seth, James, Jonah, and Craig. The 5 guys were all panicking as they tried to figure out what just happened. 1 minute they were partying and then everyone was dead. They turned on the TV to watch the news and discovered that most of Los Angeles had been destroyed by the earthquake. Following this disaster, there had been reports of looting and rioting across the whole city. It hasn't even been hours since the catastrophe happened and people are already turning against each other. The remaining partygoers learned that martial law had been declared before the signal was lost. Jay suggested going back to Seth's place, but the others refused, wanting to stay in James' house until they got rescued. As James and Craig were arguing about the poster on the wall, a helicopter crashed outside the house and one of its rotor blades pierced the poster the 2 actors were fighting about. The actors then set up the place and prepared various things, such as weapons and rations for survival. They argued about the ration system for a bit before heading to sleep. The next day, everyone was bummed out when they realized their ration system had been pretty much useless because Danny McBride cooked almost everything for breakfast, not knowing anything that happened the last night because he was knocked out the whole night after crashing the party and getting drunk. As they were telling him about the disaster that had occurred, a random man tried to break through the door they had sealed. The man's head was peeking in as he begged them to let him in, but the actors don't know him, therefore they don't trust him. While the actors were arguing about whether or not they'd let the man in, something outside the house ate the man's body and his head dropped inside the house. The actors screamed in horror as they kicked the head around like a soccer ball before Craig fearfully draped a blanket over it. The actors went upstairs to look through the glass window and see what the creature was that ate the guy, but all they saw was Los Angeles in total shambles. During dinner, the actors were talking about the recent events, trying to figure out what to make of them. When Jay showed him the Bible he was reading, he thought that the recent events might have been the apocalypse predicted in the Book of Revelation. He explained what was written in the Book of Revelation, but the others didn't believe him and just went back to chatting. The next day was filled with the actors just having fun without a care and getting high on ecstasy and weed. They were relaxing on the floor when someone outside the door started destroying the door. The actors screamed in terror as they watched an unknown being storm into the house and only quietened down upon realizing that it was just Emma, who looked relieved to see them. The actress told them about her hiding in the drainpipe for days. Days later, she stopped hearing people and started hearing the growls of an unknown creature. She decided to head back to James' house in hopes of finding another survivor and a way to survive. James led Emma to a room where she could rest before going back to the other guys to talk about her. Jay decided to address the elephant in the room, which is the fact that there is one female in a house full of 6 males. Jay wanted to make sure that everyone would be mindful when it came to Emma and make her feel safe. He explained that, as men, they should not give off a bad vibe that can make a single woman feel threatened. Jay tried to censor it as much as possible, but some of the guys got offended by his implications that they might be a threat to Emma and started using the R word, unaware that Emma overheard some of their conversation and misunderstood. Emma stormed out of the room brandishing an axe and accusing the actors of intending to violate her. The actors tried to explain themselves, but Emma refused to listen to their excuses and attacked them with the axe. She demanded that they give her their remaining drinks before fleeing. Since Hermione Granger stole all the drinks, the actors are getting thirsty. James believed that there are still at least 2 jugs of water in the basement, but the door leading to it is outside, around the side of the house. Craig was voted to retrieve the jugs of water, and they tied a rope around his waist before he went outside. But before Craig could even open the basement door, he saw something terrifying and ran back inside the house since the others had accidentally dropped the rope. Craig was panting as the others surrounded him when suddenly the rope was pulled from outside and he crashed against the door. Jonah threw a knife at Jay to cut the rope, but it pierced Jay's leg. James grabbed the knife from Jay's leg and cut the rope, frustrated because they couldn't get the jugs of water when they were literally right underneath them. Hearing this, the guys decided breaking through the floor was better than going outside. Later on, Craig approached Jay and asked the latter if he really believed that what's happening is the apocalypse. Jay answered yes and confirmed that Craig really saw something yesterday. Jay explained that even if they got left behind during the apocalypse, there is still hope and they just have to prove they're worthy of being saved. Unbeknownst to Jay and Craig, Danny overheard their conversation. Meanwhile, James and Danny were arguing, which ended with both James and Danny walking away, leaving Seth to dig a hole in the floor by himself. Seeing Seth alone, Jay approached his friend to help and the duo were peacefully talking when the floor beneath them suddenly collapsed, sending them straight into the dark basement. Craig threw them a flashlight and they looked around the dark basement. Jay and Seth yelled when they got surprised by James' cutout from Spider-Man 3. Near the cutout are the 2 jugs of water. The actors celebrated their water and had a nice drink together. But the actors started bickering again when Danny poured himself another glass of water. James rationalized that they needed to save water for later, but Danny wasn't having it. He believes that they should divide their rations based on their proportionate size, and since he's bigger, he deserves more rations. Jonah cut in and stated that they should divide everything equally. Annoyed, Danny poured the jug of water on him and screamed like a banshee while the others were holding him down. James threatened to shoot him if he didn't stop, but Danny just challenged him to do it because he believed James couldn't kill someone. Later that day, the others were quietly having a meeting while Danny was sleeping. James suggested kicking Danny out of the house as he might just drag them all down with his behavior. Jonah reasoned out that Danny was just under pressure and he's not handling it as well as the rest of them. But James still insisted on kicking Danny out. Once Danny woke up, the others explained to him what they talked about and Danny just stayed silent for a short while before angrily accepting the others' mutual decision. Before he left, Danny just had to insult the others one by one first. When it was Jay's turn, he called Jay a backstabber. He revealed that he saw Jay in Los Angeles 2 months ago and he didn't want Danny to tell Seth because he wanted to keep the illusion and make Seth believe that he only ever goes to LA to visit and stay with Seth. Afterward, Danny smugly left the house, leaving the others in chaos. Seth was mad that Jay lied to him and Jonah tried to talk to Jay nicely, but the latter just punched him. Later that night, Jonah prayed for Jay to get killed. When everyone was asleep, a dark creature crawled towards Jonah, which woke the latter up and he screamed in fear. The next day, the remaining actors voted for Jay to go to the neighbor's house to get food and water, and Craig decided to go with him. The duo reached the neighbor's house and found lots of supplies. Jay suggested for the 2 of them to just stay there together, but Craig refused because, as difficult as it is to be with the others, they are still their friends and they're all they have. Suddenly, a terrifying creature broke through the window and chased them. Jay and Craig escaped and went back to James' house. Meanwhile, Jonah suddenly collapsed and seemed to be possessed. He spoke in a demonic voice and chased after Seth and James. He pinned Seth down, but Seth punched him, knocking Jonah off of him. Jay and Craig returned and helped in subduing the possessed Jonah. They tied him to the bed and performed an exorcism on him. But then Jay and Seth fought and knocked over a candle which started a fire that spread throughout the whole house. Jonah and the house were engulfed by the fire and the remaining actors fled. James told the others that he had a house in Malibu and suggested hiding in there, but then discovered that a demon was guarding his car. Craig willingly sacrificed himself to save his friends and he was raptured for his selfless act. Meanwhile, the other 3 escaped with the car and encountered Danny on their way. With the short time Danny had since he left the house, he had already formed a group of cannibals and he led them with his sex slave, the actor Channing Tatum. Wanting to be raptured into heaven, just like Craig, James sacrificed himself to allow Seth and Jay to escape. But then James made a mistake by taunting Danny and the blue beam that was about to take him to heaven disappeared, leaving him to get eaten by the cannibals. Jay and Seth, on the other hand, stumbled upon Satan, who tried to eat them. Not knowing if they were going to survive, Jay apologized to Seth for betraying his trust, and this act of repentance caused a blue beam to appear and take Jay to heaven. Jay grabbed Seth's hand so he could take him to heaven too, but since Seth wasn't granted the gift of salvation, it was preventing them from ascending. Realizing this, Seth said goodbye to Jay as he forced his friend to leave him behind. Seth's selfless action caused another beam to appear and castrate Satan by accident. Seth was raptured into heaven and reunited with Jay and Craig. Craig informed the two newly arrived that any of their wishes could come true in heaven, and Jay wished for Everybody by the Backstreet Boys to be played. The band performed the song and everyone danced around in happiness.